as Jonathan said, Norman Hughes is my name. I'm a board member since 2018, I think. My brother was diagnosed in 2010, passed away in 2016, and then the board kindly asked me to join. And actually one of the board members, Katie, is leaving the board today, but Katie was responsible for asking me to join the board. And I'd like to thank Katie for doing that, because I've got an awful lot out of it in the last few years, so thanks, Katie. So look, you've listened to a lot of talkers this morning, and I was blown away by a couple of them, particularly the ones that shared their personal experiences. So thanks again to Katrina and Catherine for doing that. It was emotional to hear it. Just so I can only I can't even get my head around how you actually did it, and you did it so well. So thanks for that. Fantastic. So look, there's probably a lot of questions that you have. So as Jonathan said, look, we've a couple of mics. So if you want to ask a question, put up your hand. For those who are not here in the audience, as Jonathan said, there's a facility online to raise a couple of questions. So please use that facility. So can we have a hand from somebody in the audience first? Yet. So we might get a mic over there.
Thank you very much. For Peter and Orla, if I could first try to describe something. If I'm correct, I'm not a neurologist, I'm not a medical person. Motor neurons control my motor capacity. Is it correct that sensory neurons feed back from the tip of my hands to my brain? This morning, I made a cup of coffee, put my hand on the mug, I could feel the heat get to my brain. Could you describe what's happening with the motor neurons getting to my hand?
I'll do it and then he can correct me. So one of the things I've been thinking a lot about this for the last few weeks. So I'm actually giving a talk next week in New York about how much we don't know about the brain in relation to motor neuron disease. And one of the things that we know now that we didn't really appreciate, and Peter's work and some of the work that our colleagues in neural engineering have helped us with are that if you think about this, our brain works by circuits. So motor neuron disease is a disease where one part of the circuit doesn't work very well, the motor nerves. But it's probably a bit silly to think that if those motor nerves don't work, that there'll be no impact on the sensory nerves. So there probably is a secondary problem with the sensory systems in motor neuron disease, even though sensation isn't really affected. But the sort of processing of information, sensory information, probably is affected. And we have the electrical studies would suggest that that's the case. So it's a much more complicated process than I think we understood, because the way the nervous system works is a lot more complicated than we thought. So do you want to comment?
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic question, because ALS used to be conceptualized as a condition that solely affects the motor neurons. And in recent years, we have amazing evidence, both from imaging, post-mortem, to suggest that the sensory nerves themselves are affected, fibers in the arms, in the spinal cords. And then, as Ola said, the relay stations in the brain that link the sensory system to the motor system, the thalamus being one of them, these hubs, the big switchboards within deep in the brain that connect the two systems, and they are slowly and gradually affected also. So while years and years ago we thought that it's only affecting the motor neuron disease, we now have good evidence that both the sensory and the motor systems are affected, and the integration of the two are also affected.
Yeah, if I could just follow up quickly. There are tools for proprioception for hands and feet. If I used appropriate proprioceptor tools for my hands, would that enhance the sensory motor to promote, I suppose, neuroplasticity in the brain?
So I think a lot of our efforts in rehabilitation and physiotherapy rely on that very observation. So we talk about drugs all the time, but in fact, a lot of the interventions that, as part of the MDT team, is physiotherapy and occupational therapy. And I think they explore these circuits to train them and enhance neuroplasticity. And we benefit from these networks and plasticity. So I don't think it's all about drugs, no offense to Orla. It's, I think a lot of this is plasticity and physiotherapy and occupational therapy. And we used to think of cognitive reserve in psychology, but I suppose, and they are ahead of us as usual. But in fact, what happens, there's something called motor reserve. So we have backup circuits and we try to explore those. And that's where physios are amazing. You know, they don't go down the academic route like us. They don't talk about the thalamus. But they know very well if a patient exercises and they help them with balance, the patient will improve. And that's, I suppose, now we use the term motor reserve. Is that fair, Orla?
Yeah, I mean, I think we actually agree. Because because I think that one of the problems that we've had with the drug trials is that we've made very simple assumptions based on a very simple concept of the motor neuron is dying. So we put the thing that kills a motor neuron, like the gene, in a mouse or in a worm, and we say, okay, that's the target, and the drug does that target. And it's really quite naive to think that that is going to work. What we need to do, and what precision ALS is about, and what Peter's work, because Peter was one of the first people to re-describe the complexity. He's very famous, actually. We're very lucky to have him. So he's one of the first people to recognize this in the brain with his imaging studies, and then understanding the circuitry. So Peter and I work very closely with Batman, Nasser Sami, and Hiroshi McMacken and their teams, who are engineers who think about this from an engineering, and Lara McManus, who think about this from an engineering point of view. And we do see that sort of level of plasticity, but the plasticity gets overwhelmed by the disease process. So I don't think that improving your proprioception once the disease has taken shape is necessarily going to fix the problem. One of the things that we really need to think about is getting in much earlier and actually working the bits that are still working. I have this in the talk giving next week. I have this analogy of it's towering inferno, and we have a water pistol, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to put out a massive fire, raging fire, with a couple of water pistols and a few fire extinguishers. Whereas in fact, what we need to understand is, as Peter was saying, the reserve that's already there that people have, and that's what we're trying to pull out of Precision ALS, and then turn that into a series of treatments, multiple treatments probably, or treatments that work on multiple different pathways. And so, but trying to get the industry, which are corporate and supported by shareholders who are mostly venture capitalists, to actually buy into this way of thinking is a bit of a job. We are moving there. We are getting there, I think. So your thought process are absolutely right. Your instincts are absolutely right. But I fear that the idea of, say, improving your proprioception now, or getting our physiotherapists or our speech therapists to give us exercises that are going to regain function that's lost, I don't think we can do that yet. I think we will need better ways of preserving the nerves that are still not too sick, and maybe finding a way of building up the normal plasticity in the brain. As Peter says, a lot of redundancy, so trying to get that to work as well. And that's what we're trying to do. That's the new thinking behind how we try and figure out how to treat this disease. Does that answer your question?
Thanks, Orla. I'm conscious there's a few questions online, so we might go online and then we go back to the,
and then we come back into the room. That's okay. Two questions, and Orla, don't lose the microphone, because unfortunately they're both coming your direction. And I suppose it's more about the practicalities of the hospital side. Emily asked the question, is there an action plan from Beaumont Reid the delay in PEG rig placement for those with MND who want one? And there's another kind of half-linked question from Kathy, who says, what is the progress in getting dedicated beds for acute hospitals? Because there is nothing available at the moment because there's no beds anywhere in the hospital network.
So this is when I was driving here, I was listening to that the poor man who died of the aortic aneurysm in Cork. So this is something that I mean, if people like me and Peter don't get upset about this, we shouldn't be in our jobs. We should not be working if the fact that we can't get a gastrostomy in time and somebody doesn't really upset us. We shouldn't be in our jobs. So so this personally really, really upsets me. I know it upsets Annette and everybody in our team. So the difficulty is that the way hospitals are measured are based on their trolley counts in A&E. I think it's the same in James's, Peter, is it? It is. So if the hospital has people on trolleys, that overrides everything else in the hospital, no matter what. I work in the National Centre for Neuroscience, which is mostly neurosurgery, and my colleagues in neurosurgery have lost their bed access as well. So people are coming in through A&E in extremis across the board for things that should be what we call elective. Elective procedures are not, oh, I think I'll have it next week or the week after in 6 months. Elective procedures are people that we don't want to bring to A&E because they're too sick. So to answer your question, we have raised this on the risk register within the hospital, within the risk register nationally. We're talking to the hospital about two things. One is protected beds. The second is MOUs with other hospitals, with the private sector, so doing that as well. Yeah. So we are acutely aware of this as a problem, and we are in the process of trying to fix it. But the way the hospitals are structured at the moment, we're fighting against a tide of, oh well, A&E takes priority over everything. Do you want to comment, Peter, as well?
So my experience is very similar to Orla's and James's. The only thing I would add is that as soon as I flag that I'm suspecting ALS or motor neuron disease to my bed manager, they nearly always do their utmost best to get the patient in very quickly. So there's this sort of general benevolence and support that I get from my own bed managers and James's. So if I say I'm suspecting ALS, I need to bring this patient in for a lumbar puncture and MRIs. Invariably, within a week or two, they try to squeeze in the patient. Now, that could be James's only, but I feel very supported in my hospital.
Yeah, I think for diagnostic purposes, but for something where, it's a tummy tube, we have about a month or 2 months maximum. It's a part that we're most ashamed of.
Well, can I just point out from our organisation's point of view, Naomi, I'm sure you would agree with this as well, is that, our part of our role is advocacy, and this is something that is coming through, and we need to start advocating on as the organisation, and if there's nothing else the room can take away from that today, that we will do that. So that's part of what we can do to support as well.
In the last week, I've reached out to colleagues across the board to see if anybody, if the person in the catchment would be able to facilitate. If we can't get somebody into Beaumont, we are trying our best to ring around and say, look, this person lives in a catchment to your hospital. Do you think you might be able to? We would prefer to do it in Beaumont because we have Kitty McElligott, who's a specialist dietitian, and we have Ciara Amory, who's our specialist speech and language therapist. We should be doing it in Beaumont, but it's not because we don't care, and it's not because we don't fight. It's because it's just we win a battle for a few months, and then
we might take another question. I know Todd has been waiting patiently, so we just go to Todd next, if that's okay.
Thank you, Norman. For Professor Bede, I'm just wondering, is an MRI a reliable way of diagnosing motor neuron disease? Because in my case, in 2009, I was sent for an MRI which showed up everything clear. Now, I'm an insulin-dependent diabetic for the last 48 years, and in 2003 I got a bacterial meningitis listeria, which left me with peripheral neuropathy. So as a result of that, I was anxious to find out what was going on. And in 2010, I was sent for nerve conduction studies, which showed up the motor neuron disease. So that's why I'm just wondering about the MRI.
So one does not need an MRI to be formally diagnosed and correctly diagnosed. So the primary role of MR in a clinical setting is make sure that we are not missing another explanation that may end up with the same symptoms. So the role of MR in a clinical setting is to make sure that there isn't a cord compression, there isn't a tumor, there isn't a brainstem lesion. So in fact, most people with ALS would have had a normal MR or an MR that's reported as normal. So the primary objective of getting an MR in a hospital is making sure we're not missing something else that needs a surgical intervention, a big slip disc, a tumor, an old hemorrhage. that may present with the very same constellation of symptoms or mimicking ALS or motor neuron disease. The type of scans I showed, those are academic scans, or they're different from the MRIs one would get in a hospital. They were specially designed to capture the white matter and gray matter changes that are typical of ALS. So there's that distinction. You have your clinical MRI that people get in hospitals, or it's a safety net to make sure we're not missing something surgical. And then you have your research MRI scans, which has been specifically designed to capture the imaging signature of ALS.
We might give Orla and Peter a bit of a break. And I might just ask, does anyone have a question for our other panelists?
Annette, if I could ask you a question. I was only diagnosed in the 2nd of May, 4 days before my 70th birthday, with IMNDA ALS. And almost immediately, I started feeling a sense of loss or grief. And since then, I've been doing an incessant search online with academics in Trinity and UCD, looking for anybody who's been researching what I call self-grief, but could be called private grief or other things. Your definition of grief up there suits me perfectly. But can you think of any particular research on why we grieve the things we do? I'm not thinking of possessions, I'm not thinking of doings, I'm thinking of part of me as a body. So we live in a rural area, and for 18 years, we fostered 2 donkeys from the sanctuary. We had to give them up. It tore me to pieces. We have 8 raised beds, a polytunnel. I haven't been able to go into the vegetable beds for 7 or 8 months. I used to run to the local club. I used to cycle. Now, I'm grieving those things. Do you know of any research looking at grieving, not things we have, but things we are?
I myself have actually just been looking into this because I started a loss and bereavement course. And actually, I think the research in grief is very limited because it's very much focused on bereavement and the loss of life rather than actually the loss we experience every day. And the only term that's really out there, and I hope I mentioned it, was anticipatory grief. And that is the concept of grieving for something before we even lose it. And I suppose that's a lot of what I would see and work with. And it's touched on, you know, with that kind of assumptive piece around the things, I think the lady from Irish Life mentioned it, around when we have assumptions and beliefs and things that plans and hopes and dreams, and actually we can grieve for that even if we lose them. So there's a lot of research actually done on that piece for parents of children with disabilities, and there's a lot of research done on anticipatory grief with people in cancer and kind of end of life and terminal illness, but I haven't personally came across much research on it in motor neuron disease. And also a lot of the bereavement research is focused on qualitative pieces of research done with people after they lose a spouse in particular. So unfortunately not, Brian, not just yet.
Okay, we've another question down the back. Just so we can get a mic down there.
I must say, I really enjoyed hearing the practical and the personal from Katrina and Catherine. So my question to either one or both, and it's around the idea of caregiving. So I know that family, often the person closest to the individual with motor neuron disease, is also described as a caregiver. I have a slight issue about that because first and foremost, we are the family member, the person who loves them, the person who is going to be available. However, I'm wondering what's your experience of, and we hear all the talk about caregivers, the family person needing a break and needing support. What's your own experience of availability in your areas for professional home care? So people who come in professionally to home care. So number one, availability. Number two, their training, their experience of supporting you, because sometimes the need to show them and talk to them about the individual, which is yourself, Katrina, and then you as the caregiver, Catherine, you'd nearly be as well do it yourself. So that's what I'm wondering. Thank you.
It's quite a hard question to answer because I think it's a lot of trial and error. We had one carer in for Barry to help for a few hours, and it was an absolute disaster, and it really was. And he felt guilty then for, you know, that person just wasn't the right fit for us, for me, for him, for them. At the moment, we're blessed. We have a really good carer, and he, you know, the fight for the hours, which Fidelma helped with, and the IMNDA and the support letters and everything. Unfortunately, you do kind of have to fight a lot for a lot of the things that you do get, unfortunately. But don't be afraid to find what fits for ye. Like what fits for Katrina mightn't fit for us, and you know, you have to find what fits for ye, and don't just take it. You know, don't feel like you're being awkward. You're not at all. It has to fit, and you'll know when you find the fit because it'll just work. So just don't be afraid to kind of stand your ground. And as I said earlier, stand it respectfully. You know, I know we can all lose our head and everything, but have the respect for everybody. Everybody is genuinely trying to help as much as it can be a nuisance. But sometimes you have to find the supports yourself, and it might be a family member, it might be a friend, it might be a stranger, but whatever it is for ye, like don't be afraid to have the hard conversations around it and really work to find what fits for ye. And don't feel guilty for needing to get out for an hour, because it's constant, it's day and night. You don't know when something is, you know, and everything seems worse in the dark, you know, at night time, but be prepared. Speak to your nurses, speak to your GPs, we have antibiotics and steroids at home all the time. And they just knowing that they're there, that in the middle of the night you won't be frightened, or have your people to call, you know, have a hard conversation before so that you can have that step is easier for you. But yeah, a bit of trial and error and consistency and what fits for ye. I hope that helps.
And Naomi, you might have some thoughts on that as well.
I think it's so individual to each family, and but also around the country, services are so different, and one side of the River Lee could be totally different to the other, and it's finding the right people that work for you, as you said. I think education for caregivers is really difficult because they don't come across a lot of people with motor neuron disease, but that's where the nurses have come in, and they actually are going into different hospitals, different nursing homes, and educating the staff, and that has increased and increased over the last few years. And we work with the nurses in Beaumont as well, so that we are trying to educate other allied healthcare professionals, so that when they come across somebody with motor neuron disease, well, first of all, they know to get in touch with us so we can help them, but they'll build on their own information and their education.
Okay.
Just say something.
Thanks, guys.
Sorry, I won't keep you. I suppose having worked in services as a nurse for ID, intellectual disability, I had a lot of experience of people at home and carers going into the home. So I get the question. It's very difficult because MND isn't out there as much, and carers are so strapped for time, and that's the big thing. They're coming to you, they have an 8-hour shift, they're driving to your house, they have little or no time to make that connection. They're trying, and most of them are really, really good, but there are some of them who are burnt out. And my thing would be, like, I'm not there yet, but my OT has told me I will be entitled to carers in the home when the time comes. It does fall back on the family, because no one can do it as good as you do it for your person. And so you're going to have to maybe accept the help with what comes and give them little hints and tips and prepare. Write down on a few pieces of card, my John likes things done this way. This is what he likes to wear. This is what she wants to do. If the person can't say for themselves, be their advocate. And that might be prepared. I was a Girl Scout. Be prepared for when they come and trust them, you know. And if they don't, if they aren't up to scratch, report them. I'm sorry, but you know, you have to just get on with it. Report them. Don't be afraid. Don't accept less than what you deserve. Okay?
I think one comment there from Katrina was nobody does it as well as you do. So I think that's a compliment to everybody here in the caring environment. Do we have time for one last 5 more minutes? Question down in the back. And then we come to this table here, yeah.
Here as well, Norman.
Is there any correlation between glutamate and oxidative stress and getting motor neuron disease?
Can you repeat the question again?
Is there
Oxidative
any
stress.
correlation between oxidative stress, glutamate, and having MND?
Oxidative stress and getting motor neuron disease. Yeah, so that was, so we know that in some forms of motor neuron disease, there is evidence that the cells are distressed, the motor nerves are distressed, and the little energy part of the cells, the mitochondria, get a bit distressed. And there is, and when cells get distressed, they release things that are stress, that are not good for the cell, and that's what we call oxidative stress. It's a slight variation in the way the cells metabolize. External exposure to oxidative stress, probably not. There's a big literature on exercise, and if we all know that rugby players, some rugby players, American footballers, some soccer players, seems to be a higher rate of motor neuron disease among some types of sport. And one of the things is that they are more exposed to oxidative stress from engaging in sport. But it's what I was saying before. It's probably a subgroup where there may be a genetic component that makes people a little bit more likely to develop that sort of stressor in that environment. So most people who are athletes, most people who engage in behaviors that lead to a little bit of oxidative change don't get motor neuron disease. So I think it may be related to a genetic predisposition and then certain things that happen to people. The drugs that we use that are supposed to mop up oxidative stress haven't worked. So.
Okay, we go to next question here.
Yeah, please. Peter, the slides that you were showing that were taken the scans that were taken every 3 months, should more of us be getting them scans to correlate with Orla's study?
You're very kind to ask this question. And one thing I would say is that patients have been incredibly generous to come to us and participate in these studies. And I've been incredibly fortunate that people came from really far, top of Donegal, Kerry, coming up to James's. It's a long journey and waiting outside to get a scan done. So there is no direct benefit to the individual patient from participating, and I'm always very upfront in saying that to the patient. So it helps us to get a better understanding of disease propagation and what's happening. And it just helps us to get a better understanding of the biology of the disease, but it does not help the individual patient. It doesn't bring... It does help with the research, absolutely, yes. The answer is that it helps us incredibly in fine-tuning our understanding. How come somebody has a disease? Some patients progress faster, some patients progress much, much slower. It helps us to understand how come one brain region is affected first and it jumps to another brain region. So it brings a wealth of information to us, yes. And it does link with precision ALS, as Orla is telling me.
To get the scans done, that it would elevate it and correlate with Orla's study?
Yes, and we do that. So we integrate our data across from neuropsychological data, genetics, serum data from blood test, and input from physiotherapy. So it's a big data pool, and it does help us very, very significantly, yes.
So Peter is part of a big international group on imaging as well, and we work very closely with the people in Utrecht who do a lot of imaging, and in Turin who do a lot of imaging, and where else? And Paris. And so Peter is sort of their go-to person in Paris for motor neuron disease imaging as well. He's half French now at this point. So we can act. So those data eventually will get pulled into precision. So you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Okay, we take another question here on this table.
This is for Catherine. Catherine, in terms of the state support, HSE, other departments, local authorities, what would you say has been the most supportive help you've got as a carer, and what has been the least or the one that needs much more improvement?
Yeah, I'll choose my words. The supports are poor. We all know that sitting here. You have to fight for every single thing you get. We had to fight for Barry to get his disability, fight for me to get my carers. I only claimed for half carers because we were €20 better off if I didn't. So we went for that one. So technically I'm only getting half carers, which is absolutely appalling, because you're trying your best to get everything for your person, to get them to eat healthy, to just have a good quality of life, and it's difficult. It's a constant battle. Like, as I said earlier, the MND warriors they've their own battle every day, and then the carers are your person fighting for you. We have our own battles because you're constantly the person trying. But we were trying to get some extra hours home help, which HSE weren't going to cover. They just weren't. So the IMNDA stepped in and they helped with that. So there are hours there and there are things you can do, but it's not great. It really isn't. You have to fight for everything and take everything that you're entitled to. Don't feel one bit bad for it, because we did for a while. And somebody said earlier, I think yourself said, oh, I'm too well for that, or and it was said to us once, there's a lot of people worse off than you, and what do you say to that? What do you say? You're doing your best, both people or every person. It has such a ripple effect. But unfortunately, the services, HSE, we all know, are not doing, well, it's stretched. But the IMNDA are there to help, and they will help, and ask, for letters. I've Johanna's head wrecked with letters of support, and Tracy and everything, because they have a letter for everything, and you can, and don't be afraid to ask. Don't feel bad. You're entitled to good quality of life, regardless of what's going on. Everyone, so, yeah. Sorry, I don't have a more positive answer, but you will get there in the end.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons why I got involved with the IMNDA was through the frustration that I initially had with the HSE, and I wasn't getting answers, and I was frustrated, and I didn't know, I was lost, right? And then my initial contact with the IMNDA, it was a whole new world, and things happened quickly. I wasn't put in a queue. And that's why I wanted to give something back as a family who received those services from the IMNDA, and I was so impressed. I got involved. I wanted to give something back. So we hopefully fill that void. So, yeah.
Will we have one more?
One more question.
One more. So Norman, you get to pick. Is it this lady here?
So we just have a question here at the front.
Is there research only for ALS and not PLS?
Okay.
PLS is a subtype of ALS, and actually, we're sitting with one of the world experts in PLS.
I'm sitting next to Orla.
There's a hospital pass.
I should be sitting somewhere far from Orla.
That is wonderful.
Next
Orla.
time
That
I'm
is
sitting.
award-winning.
But so we have a huge interest in PLS. It's a very rare and unusual subtype, and we have a big cohort of patients, and we keep on examining. We try to learn from PLS, and those patients behave differently. It's reminiscent of ALS, and yet the symptoms are different. The rate of progression is different. Their care needs are different. Their psychological profile is different. So there's something unique about PLS that we are yet to crack and understand, because that distinction between PLS and ALS may be relevant to therapy development, in my opinion. It somehow doesn't spread into the anterior horns of the spinal cord. It affects the brain very similarly. So if I see in a brain scan of someone with PLS and ALS, I would struggle to say which one is which. But if I would look at the spinal cord of a patient with PLS and ALS, I would know straight away. So for whatever reason, in patients with PLS, the disease, the same abnormal proteins, TDP43, does not spread into the lower motor neurons. And I think, in my own opinion, that could be a key barrier to the development of ALS. So I think it's a fascinating cohort that we're just about to explore a bit more. Does that?
Yeah. What Peter is also is quite a humble man. So there's a big meeting on PLS in December in Montreal that is being run by colleagues across the world. But Peter is going to be one of the keynote speakers. I have the little tiny part of it, but Peter is going to talk about his worldwide research, his research that is worldwide recognized. So there is an interest in PLS. The companies are not quite there in terms of trying to develop drugs because it moves so slowly. They want to see changes really fast. But there's a group of us, including Peter, who supervised Owen Finnegan, who did his PhD in this, that are really interested in trying to understand this. So yes is the answer, but we're not there yet in terms of treatments.
Okay, we might leave it there then. Can I ask you to put your hands together and thank our panelists?
Thank you, Norman. Thank you, Norman. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Orla. Thank you, Annette. Can we have a huge, huge, huge thank you for Katrina and Catherine? Amazing. And our wonderful Naomi. Thank you all, guys. We leave you. Exit stage left gracefully.